Imagine the one day of your life you have dreamed about since you were a little girl. The flowers are perfect. The music is playing. The dress fits like it was made just for you. And then, in one single moment, everything stops. Not because something went wrong with the ceremony. Not because someone objected. But because something priceless disappeared. And the woman being blamed for stealing it was standing in the corner of the room with tears running down her face, hands trembling, unable to speak. She had no lawyer, no family in the room, no one to defend her, just a crowd of strangers who had already made up their minds. And just when it seemed like nothing could save her, a child, a tiny 3-year-old boy who had been sitting quietly on the floor, looked up. He pointed his little finger, and he said 4 words that changed everything. This is not a movie. This is a real story. And by the time it ends, you will question everything you think you know about trust, jealousy, and the kind of evil that can hide behind a smile. Before we go any further, ask yourself this. Have you ever been in a room where everyone was pointing at the wrong person? Have you ever watched someone get blamed for something they did not do, and felt that helpless feeling of knowing the truth but not being able to prove it? How many innocent people have been destroyed because the crowd moved too fast and thought too slow? This story is going to take you deep into one of those moments. A moment where a woman's reputation, livelihood, and dignity were placed on trial in the middle of a wedding venue, while the real guilty party stood close by, watching, waiting, and smiling. And the only witness to the truth was a little boy who had not yet learned how to lie. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Emily Carter grew up in a quiet suburb just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, checked in on her friends, and always showed up when it mattered. 32 years old. Dark hair. A warm laugh that could fill a room. She had built her own small interior design business from nothing, working weekends and holidays for years until she finally had something to be proud of. People who knew Emily described her the same way every single time. She was kind. She was the real deal. But life had not been easy on her heart. She had been through 2 serious relationships that ended badly, one of which left her questioning whether love was ever going to find her at all. And then, at a mutual friend's dinner party on a rainy Tuesday evening, she met Daniel Hayes. Daniel was a structural engineer. Calm, steady, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. He brought Emily coffee without being asked. He remembered small things she mentioned in passing. He was not perfect, but he was present. And for Emily, that meant everything. They dated for 2 years before Daniel got down on one knee at the same little Italian restaurant where they had their first date. Emily said yes before he could finish the sentence. The wedding was planned for late spring. A beautiful estate property outside of town with rolling green gardens, white string lights, and a reception hall that smelled like fresh roses and old wood. Everything was carefully chosen. The flowers, the menu, the seating chart, the music. But there was one thing that meant more to Emily than any of the decorations. A diamond and sapphire necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women in the Carter family. It was estimated to be worth nearly $400,000, but to Emily, it was worth far more than that. It was her grandmother's hands, her grandmother's voice, her grandmother's love, resting against her collarbone on the most important day of her life. Now there was another person in this story who had watched Emily's life unfold from a very close distance. Her younger sister, Vanessa Carter. Vanessa was 28 years old, and by all outward appearances she seemed supportive, enthusiastic, and happy for Emily. She was in the wedding party. She had helped with the planning. She smiled in every photograph. But the truth about Vanessa had always lived just beneath the surface, in the small sharp comments she made at family dinners, in the way she minimized Emily's accomplishments, in the way she sometimes looked at her sister with an expression that was not quite pride. Growing up, Emily had always been the one who was celebrated. Emily received the academic awards. Emily got the scholarship. Emily started the business. Emily found Daniel. And Vanessa, for all those years, had swallowed something bitter and called it love. People close to both sisters had noticed it. A cousin once pulled Emily aside and said quietly, "I don't think Vanessa is as happy for you as she seems." Emily had laughed it off. She loved her sister. She could not imagine any other truth. And then there was Grace Monroe. Grace was a professional house attendant and event staff worker. a single mother raising her 3-year-old son Noah entirely on her own after her marriage ended. She had been hired through a staffing agency to work the wedding weekend. Her job was to assist with the bridal suite, help with errands, keep things running smoothly. She was quiet and professional. She arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. One of the other staff members later described her as the kind of person who gets the job done and never makes it about herself. Grace had brought Noah with her that morning because her babysitter had canceled at the last minute. The agency had been informed. Permission had been given. Noah sat in a corner of the suite with his small backpack, his juice box, and his toy cars, watching the world of adults swirl around him with the quiet, wide-eyed curiosity that only small children carry. Vanessa had noticed Grace the moment she arrived, and unlike everyone else who found Grace warm and reliable, Vanessa had made her discomfort immediately visible. She spoke to Grace in a clipped, dismissive tone. She questioned whether Grace should have her child present. She made comments about whether items had been moved or touched. Nobody paid much attention at the time. Weddings are busy. Emotions are high. And Vanessa was always a little difficult. No one thought much of it. But looking back later, every single person who was in that room would understand that Vanessa had already been building something. Quietly, carefully, like a fire that starts in the walls before anyone smells the smoke. Wedding morning arrived with the kind of golden light that makes everything feel cinematic. The estate was alive with movement. Florists carrying arrangements. Caterers unloading trays. Photographers scouting angles. The bridesmaids laughed in the dressing room, passing around a bottle of champagne and lipstick. Emily stood in front of the mirror in her gown and felt, for the first time in years, completely at peace. She reached for her grandmother's necklace. She opened the velvet jewelry case that had been sitting on the dressing table since the night before, and she stopped breathing. The case was empty. The necklace was gone. What followed was not a calm, organized search. It was immediate panic. Emily's hands shook as she checked the case again, turned it over, looked inside the lining. Her maid of honor checked under the table. Someone else checked the bag. The dresser drawers were pulled open. The floor was searched on hands and knees. Nothing. The necklace was gone. And then Vanessa spoke. Her voice was controlled, measured, almost too calm for the moment. Has anyone checked the staff's things? She paused just long enough for the suggestion to land before adding, I just think we need to be thorough. Every eye in the room turned toward Grace, who was standing near the door with Noah beside her. Grace looked confused at first, then alarmed. I haven't touched anything, she said quickly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes had gone wide with fear. Nobody said a word in her defense. Not immediately. Because when someone makes an accusation in a room full of panicked, emotional people, logic tends to leave the building. The search of Grace's belongings was not polite. A handbag was emptied onto a chair. Her staff tote bag was opened and rifled through. Noah watched from the corner with wide brown eyes, clutching his toy car against his chest, not making a sound. No necklace was found. But Vanessa wasn't done. Maybe it's in her car, she said. Or maybe she passed it to someone. The room shifted. Someone called the venue manager. Someone else talked about calling the police. Grace was crying now. Not loud, desperate crying, but the quiet, humiliated kind that comes when a person realizes they are being swallowed whole by something they cannot stop. She kept saying, I didn't take anything. I would never do that. And some people in that room believed her, but some people did not. And in moments like that, doubt is enough to do real damage. Emily was torn. She did not want to believe Grace had stolen anything. But the necklace was gone, and someone had to know where it was, and her sister was standing there with such a look of certainty that it felt almost like evidence in itself. The wedding was now 40 minutes behind schedule. The groom had been told there was a delay. Guests were beginning to wonder. And the bridal suite felt less like a place of celebration and more like a courtroom where everyone had already agreed on the verdict. Think about Grace for a moment. She is standing in a room full of strangers, her son watching her be humiliated, no family with her, no advocate, no one to say her name with kindness. She is a woman who showed up to work hard and do her job well, and in a matter of minutes, she has been transformed into a suspect. Have you ever felt that kind of helplessness? The kind where the truth lives inside you, but no one is willing to hear it? Because that is exactly where Grace was standing, and the worst of it was still coming. Daniel Hayes was not a man who moved on assumptions. When someone pulled him aside and explained what was happening in the bridal suite, His first instinct was not anger. It was doubt. Something about the story felt wrong to him, though he could not yet say exactly what. He had met Grace briefly the day before when she helped organize the rehearsal evening. She had struck him as thoughtful and professional. And something about the speed of the accusation, about who had made it and how quickly it had spread, made him uneasy. He quietly asked to speak to the venue manager alone. He asked one question: who had access to the bridal suite in the last 12 hours? The manager pulled out the access log. Staff. Family members. The wedding party. Daniel asked whether there were any security cameras covering the hallway outside the suite. There were, but reviewing the footage would take time. Meanwhile, back inside the suite, small details were beginning to surface. One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Tara, quietly mentioned to Emily that she had seen Vanessa in the hallway outside the bridal suite quite early that morning, before most of the others had arrived. Vanessa had told her she was checking on some flowers. Another staff member remembered seeing Vanessa carrying a white garment bag with a zip closure into the suite at some point during the morning, then leaving with it. When asked about it, Vanessa had explained it as her backup outfit. Nobody had pushed further. Why would they? She was the sister of the bride. She belonged there. And this is the thing about people who plan to do harm. They count on belonging. They count on being trusted. They count on the fact that nobody suspects the person standing closest to you. But one person had seen something that none of the adults had considered worth noticing. Noah Monroe had been sitting quietly in his corner of that bridal suite for hours, watching everything. Children at that age are remarkable observers. They have not yet learned what to notice and what to ignore. They have not yet learned that some things are better left unsaid. They see the world with complete, uncomplicated honesty. And Noah had seen something very specific. He had watched the pretty lady in the white dress, the one with the big smile, go to the table where the jewelry case was sitting. He had watched her open something. He had watched her put something shiny inside a bag. And then he had watched her zip the bag closed. He didn't know what any of it meant. He was 3 years old. But he remembered it the way children remember things, completely and without judgment. If you are still watching, drop the words "truth always wins" in the comments right now. Let's see who is following every detail of this story. The tension in the suite had reached a kind of unbearable stillness. Grace had stopped defending herself because she had realized no one was truly listening. She was sitting in a chair near the window with Noah on her lap, whispering quietly to him, trying to hold herself together. The wedding was now over an hour delayed. Some guests had begun to whisper that the ceremony might be canceled. Vanessa moved through the room with a kind of quiet authority, occasionally adding a comment, occasionally casting a look in Grace's direction that read like certainty. But Daniel was still in the hallway with the venue manager, asking questions. And Tara was still thinking about that garment bag. It was Noah who broke the silence. Not loudly, not dramatically. He had slipped off his mother's lap and walked across the room to where Emily was standing. He tugged on the skirt of her wedding gown. Emily looked down, distracted and exhausted. "What is it, sweetheart?" Noah pointed across the room, directly at Vanessa. "The pretty lady put the shiny thing in her bag," he said in his small, certain voice. "I saw her." The room went quiet in the way that rooms do when something has shifted, when a single sentence rearranges the air. Vanessa laughed. A quick, dismissive laugh. "He's a toddler," she said. "He doesn't know what he saw." But Noah did not move his finger. He pointed at the white garment bag hanging on the back of Vanessa's chair. "That bag," he said. "The shiny thing is in that bag." Daniel had walked back into the room at that exact moment. He had caught the last part. He looked at the bag. He looked at Vanessa. And he said, very calmly, "Vanessa, can we look inside the bag?" Vanessa said it was her personal property. She said it was inappropriate. She said people were being ridiculous for listening to a 3-year-old. She laughed again, but this time the laugh had an edge to it, like something that had been held too tightly for too long. Tara stepped forward and said quietly, "I saw you with that bag this morning." The venue manager stepped forward and said the footage from the hallway was now available for review. The pressure in the room changed all at once. Vanessa looked around her, and for the first time that morning, she had nowhere to move. She reached for the bag. She began to protest again. And then Emily, her voice shaking but steady, said the single sentence that ended it. "Vanessa, let me see the bag." Vanessa's hand stopped. Inside the white garment bag, in a small interior zip compartment sewn into the lining, was the diamond and sapphire necklace. Their grandmother's necklace. The one that had been passed down through 3 generations of Carter women. The one that was never supposed to leave the family. The one Vanessa had been trusted, as family, to be near. The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that room had ever heard. Emily held the necklace in her hands and looked at her sister for a long time without speaking. Grace pressed her face into Noah's hair and cried. Not out of anger. Out of relief. The pure, exhausting relief of having survived something that should never have happened to her at all. And then Vanessa, for the first time, looked like what she actually was. Not a confident woman who had caught a thief, but a frightened, hollow person who had been caught by the smallest possible witness. She confessed, not all at once, and not willingly, but piece by piece as the weight of the room pressed in around her. She had planned it for weeks. She had chosen Grace deliberately because she knew no one would question a hired worker. She had wanted the wedding derailed. She had wanted Emily embarrassed in front of everyone she loved. Not because she hated her sister, she said, but because she had spent so many years feeling invisible beside her that she had stopped knowing the difference between jealousy and hatred. You always had everything, Vanessa said through tears. Every single time, it was you. And I just wanted one day where something went wrong for you instead of me. Emily stared at her sister and said nothing. Because there are things that cannot be answered. There are wounds that go so deep that words cannot reach the bottom of them. And the truth that lived inside that confession was not really about a necklace at all. It was about a little girl who grew up feeling unseen, and who had spent decades turning that pain into something that could destroy the people closest to her. The wedding resumed 3 hours later than planned. The garden was still lit. The flowers were still standing. And the guests who remained, most of them, gathered quietly in the courtyard as the evening light began to soften into gold. The ceremony was smaller than intended, more intimate, more honest. Emily walked down the aisle with her grandmother's necklace resting against her collarbone, and every single person who knew what had almost happened that day felt the weight of it differently. Daniel held her hands and looked at her the way a man looks at a woman when he knows exactly who she is and loves her without reservation. Their vows were simple, but they meant everything, because they were made by 2 people who had just been reminded of what actually matters. Grace Monroe received a formal, public apology from the venue management, from several guests who had doubted her, and from Emily herself. Emily took Grace's hands in both of hers and said, I am so deeply sorry that you had to go through that. In my home, on my day, you deserved none of it. She also ensured that Grace was compensated generously beyond her contracted fee, both for the work and for the dignity that had been taken from her. And Noah, the little boy with the toy car and the juice box, who had simply told the truth because he did not yet know any reason not to, became something of a quiet legend among the guests. One of the photographers later said that she had watched him from across the room all morning, sitting in his corner, watching, and that there had been something in his expression that she could only describe as waiting. Like he knew something was wrong and was holding it carefully until the right moment. Vanessa did not attend the reception. She left the estate that evening, and the days that followed brought a long, painful silence between the 2 sisters. There was no immediate reconciliation. There was no tearful embrace at the end of the night. Because real life does not work that way. Some betrayals take time to process. Some wounds require distance before they can be examined with clear eyes. But 6 months after the wedding, Emily and Vanessa began a process of family counseling together. Not to pretend that nothing had happened, but to try to understand how a person gets to a place where they can watch an innocent woman be destroyed and feel nothing but relief. It was a long and difficult road. Some weeks were worse than others, but Emily chose to walk it. Because she had grown up loving her sister, and she was not yet willing to give up on the version of Vanessa that existed before the jealousy had taken everything else over. The lesson that lives inside this story is not a simple one. It is not just about jealousy, though jealousy is in here. It is not just about class, though class is in here too. It is about the stories we tell ourselves about other people, about how quickly we believe the accusation that fits our assumptions and dismiss the truth that challenges them. Grace Monroe was treated as a suspect the moment she was named as one, not because there was evidence, but because she was easy to suspect. And the person nobody suspected was family. The person nobody suspected had smiled through every photograph. The person nobody suspected had helped plan the seating chart. There is a lesson in that. A quiet, uncomfortable lesson about where we place our trust and why. Now I want to ask you something directly. If you had been in that bridal suite that morning, what would you have done? Would you have been one of the people who looked at Grace and believed the accusation? Would you have been one of the few who paused and said something wasn't right? Or would you have stayed quiet, the way so many people do when the crowd is moving in one direction and they are not sure they have the courage to stand against it? Because here is the honest truth. Most of us, in a room full of panic and emotion, would have followed the crowd. Most of us would have looked at the hired help and thought what we were expected to think. And that is not a comfortable thing to admit. But it is true. And the only way it changes is if we are willing to sit with the discomfort of that truth long enough to let it teach us something. Think about Grace for one more moment. Think about what it feels like to stand in a room and be accused of something you did not do, with no power, no voice, and no one in your corner. Think about the fact that if Noah had not said what he said, Grace might have been handed to the police with a story that had already been told without her. Think about how many times that happens to people who do not have a 3-year-old witness standing in their corner. And ask yourself what you can do differently. How quickly do you judge? How quickly do you believe the story that sounds most convincing, without asking whether it is true? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. This story was inspired by real events, drawn from documented cases of theft and false accusation during wedding celebrations, where the trusted were guilty and the innocent were blamed. Real people live these moments. Real lives are changed by them. And real children sometimes see what adults refuse to. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell us what moment in this story hit you the hardest. Tell us what you would have done. Tell us how you would have felt if you were Grace standing in that room. Your words matter here. This community is built on stories that are real and raw and true. And we read every single comment. If you are new to this channel, welcome. You found us at the right time. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Because the next story is already waiting. And it may shake you even harder than this one did. Truth has a way of finding the light, even when everyone else is looking in the wrong direction. And sometimes, the only thing standing between injustice and the truth is a 3-year-old boy with a toy car and nothing to hide.